June 1948, Moscow. The design bureau has been feverish for a week. This has never happened before. An extremely important state order for drawings is being prepared in great haste. People work overtime, but still, obviously, they will not have time to meet the deadline. And then the management makes an incredible decision to give all the drawings to one employee. But why was it done? Late at night, the office is empty. The young designer got to work and broke away from the drawings only 3 days later. As a result, he coped with the office's weekly workload on his own. The employees were amazed by such unprecedented efficiency, and no one guessed at the expense of what had happened. This man will eventually become the famous Soviet biochemist Lev Osterman. In his autobiography Against the Current, he will talk about this 3-day marathon on phenamine. It was the most intimate secret of the era of the Soviet Union, the country of records and 5-year awards, the country of an invincible army, strong workers, and champion athletes. A country that said, "We are the best, we will catch up and overtake." And no one knew that many victories in this crazy race were achieved with the help of drugs. See further, a fear pill for Soviet soldiers. What were the penalty battalion soldiers given during the failed operations of World War II? The post-war Stakhanov movement and drugs, happiness in ordinary bread. Psychedelics on the shelves of Soviet pharmacies. What drugs were used to turn Soviet women into men, and what drugs were tested on mental hospital inmates? How did the crazy projects of the secret Kremlin laboratory number 13 end? November 1941, Tula region. Fierce battles at the front have been going on for several days. The Red Army suffers defeat after defeat. The Germans have already entered Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and are now going to Moscow. Under the onslaught of huge enemy forces, the Soviet troops are retreating. It was at this point that the order came from Moscow: hold back the Germans at all costs. There is nowhere to wait for salvation. The first to go into battle will be the soldiers of the penalty battalion. They will take the worst hit. But how to make them go to certain death? How to convince not to leave the battlefield? Before the night attack, the suicide bombers were lined up. It was noticeable how nervous they were. These people knew their destinies were already decided in advance. They had a few hours left to live. They greedily drank the 100 grams permitted before the battle, knowing full well that alcohol would not save them from the insane fear that completely engulfed them.
But that day the impossible happened. For the first time in the history of combat, Soviet soldiers managed to go on the offensive. They defeated the enemy's forces, which were twice as large. As a result of the battle, with minimal losses, our soldiers managed to destroy an entire tank division and 49 enemy guns. This allowed us to gain time to organize our defense, and the Germans were stopped.
With a sinking heart, the Soviet people listened to the joyful news of the first victory of our troops. and no one knew what the price of this victory was for the winners themselves. That night, the soldiers of the penal battalion, lined up in a line, did not know that only a few hours would pass, and there would be no trace of their fear. They will rush into battle with fury and inexhaustible energy. And the reason for this will be the 100 grams of alcohol allowed before the fight. Or rather, the substance contained in the vodka.
We managed to find out the name of this substance. It turns out that that night, the soldiers were mixed with a substance called phenomene. It is a powerful stimulant drug or narcotic. With large doses, a person could do without sleep for 10 to 12 days. All her sensations intensified several times. Her vigilance increased. But most importantly, the feeling of fear and pain was dulled. But where did this drug come from on the front lines of World War II?
It is hard to believe, but it was delivered from a closed laboratory in Lubyanka.
Well, these drugs, all psychostimulants, were designed to temporarily increase a person's performance in extreme conditions. For example, amphetamines, which are also psychostimulants, were often developed and used to relieve long-haul pilots of the need to sleep. That is before departure, when it was necessary to spend 20 hours or more in flight continuously, and there was no replacement crew and was not expected. The pilot had to stay awake all this time.
Traria and Lubyanka. This man has been lying motionless in the ward for several days. He was brought to the infirmary from the prison cell. After many hours of interrogation, he could hardly feel his body, could not speak or move even a hand. But today everything will be different. He will be given one injection, and the reaction will be unpredictable. In a few minutes, this calm person is overcome with unprecedented aggression. He will forget about the pain, like a madman jumping out of bed. The man seemed to have so much strength that he was ready to break down walls. This is how the first experiments with phenomene took place, and they were carried out by order of the Soviet government in a secret laboratory near the Kremlin. It was called Special Chemical Laboratory 13.
Indeed, experiments with such substances were carried out in the 30s, and maybe even earlier, when a chemical laboratory was created, or simply a laboratory, as it was called then. It was created in the bowels of the Soviet Special Services. Well, for example, increasing, say, a person's physical capabilities, intellectual abilities, the ability to stay awake for a certain time, which is very important because there are times when it is simply, as they say, necessary. And on the other hand, it is drugs with such a strong effect that can lead to the fact that a person's will is completely suppressed and a person does some incredible things that he might never have done before.
The head of the special department of the NKVD, Arkady Hertsovsky, walked for a long time along the line of refined people in front of him, but he could not choose. He was personally responsible for the selection of healthy prisoners for further experiments, and now he was terribly worried. He had to report on the work done to the top management, including personally to Comrade Beria, who was in charge of this direction. Finally, he selected 5 people. Now these prisoners had only one, but very honorable mission to serve as guinea pigs for the benefit of the state.
Scientists faced the task of creating a new model of a Soviet soldier, hardy, fearless, and tireless. The need for such soldiers appeared from the first days of the war, when the Soviet army suffered significant defeats. It was then that Fenomen first appeared at the front. It would seem that the recipe was found, but no one could predict what an unexpected effect this perfect Soviet fear pill would have.
September 1944, Leningrad. This year, a huge wave of robberies of pharmacy warehouses swept through the city. A special military commission began to investigate the case. The investigators did not hide their surprise. The robbers were interested in pills of a very specific spectrum of action. They were pills with a narcotic effect. But who needed so many drugs and why? The answer appeared completely by accident. In the basement of one of the houses, investigators found a whole box of stolen drugs. Their owner turned out to be a former soldier who had been awarded several orders for bravery. The name of this person has not been preserved, only fragments of testimony remain. But this was enough to understand the real reason for these robberies, which were carried out by former frontline soldiers.
This is how the most important side effect of this phenomenon, addiction, was actively manifested. That is why drug addiction grew uncontrollably after the war in the country. But the Soviet government was in no hurry to take any measures because drug addiction had to be fought in the Kremlin itself.
Kremlin Hospital, Minnokuzutsakri. That day, a new box of ampules was brought to the office of the head physician of the Kremlin hospital. They were immediately hidden in an iron safe, because these are very valuable medicines for the chosen ones. Within an hour, visitors began to come one by one for these medicines. Each of them received several ampules, and they all immediately locked themselves in their offices. No one could disturb them at this time. These treasured ampules contained morphine, the most popular drug for the elite. A fast and effective painkiller that competed with another drug for the top, cocaine. A favorite drug of Comrade Lenin's entourage.
In the 20s and 30s, the use of cocaine and morphine, especially in the 20s, became a mass phenomenon, especially in the Bolshevik environment, and, by the way, even among diplomats.
1920, Lubyanka. This man almost falls off his chair from fatigue. But the interrogation did not stop. For 2 days now, the head of the emergency commission, Felix Dzerzhinsky, has been trying to extract valuable information from the German spy. The prisoner faints from hunger and insomnia, but Dzerzhinsky looks very cheerful. From time to time, he interrupts to take a new dose of cocaine. Soon the prisoner was taken away, and Dzerzhinsky stayed behind to receive the next one. It was he who introduced the fashion for drugs in the Kremlin, a fashion that reached unprecedented proportions under Joseph Stalin. After the war, with the beginning of a new wave of repression, with the help of cocaine and morphine, most high-ranking officials of the USSR relieved stress.
Such an innocent at first glance machine with the inscription "bread" had a special meaning in those days. In the Stalinist era, political prisoners were transported in such cars. Stalin's entourage lived in constant fear. They were afraid of the leader, afraid of arrests and camps. Yes, life in constant stress gradually turned the Kremlin sky dwellers into true drug addicts.
Among the most famous are two people's commissars of the NKVD, Henry Yagoda and his successor Mykola Yezhov. And also a huge number of ministers who changed quite often under Stalin. How widespread morphine was is evidenced by a note to Pavel Obrosov, head of the Kremlin's Medical and Sanitary Department, dated April 3, 1926, from the secret department of the Central Committee of the CPSU. The note contained a request to create a first aid kit in the department to provide assistance to patients who do not require the participation of a doctor. The application also included huge doses of morphine. Back in the 30s, the drug was considered a privilege of the elite. But the Second World War changed this principle and opened new horizons for future Soviet achievements. Minsk. For the third day, the workers of the machine-building plant did not show up at their workplaces. This was an unprecedented case for the USSR. It was an open protest of workers to the Soviet government, but people were forced to do it. They were not paid wages, they were fed extremely poorly in the local canteen, and in order to draw attention to themselves, the workers stopped production.
And the reaction was not long in coming. The rioting workers were arrested. But the Kremlin realized that such a situation could be repeated in other plants or factories. After all, the problem of food shortages and salary delays was global. A wave of mass popular uprisings could start overnight. Therefore, it was necessary to prevent discontent at all costs. And they found a solution.
Despite the terrible consequences of taking phenamine, they did not think of giving up the drug. After all, then, in the situation of post-war devastation, a Superman was needed again, strong, hardy, able to work around the clock, continuously, without knowing fatigue. Now the task is to exceed the production plan, to complete the 5-year plan in 3 years by any means necessary. And a new little-known drug in the USSR until now, Pervitin. This drug was taken by German soldiers on the front lines of the Second World War.
Pervitin became a systemic product in the first aid kits of both SS and Wehrmacht soldiers. What is known is that this actually contradicted one of the main theses of Nazi ideology, which stated that a person should lead a healthy lifestyle and not use any harmful substances. In this case, to some extent, the initial success of Nazi Germany was also due to the fact that Pervitin helped to increase the fighting capacity of the German troops.
According to preliminary information, Pervitin showed itself much better than phenamine. The effect of this drug was longer, and the efficiency was higher. This should have been checked by Soviet scientists. 6, Lubyanka. The members of the Special Commission gathered in the prison yard from the very morning. For 5 hours now, they have been watching in amazement as the prisoner runs circles around the playground without stopping. The results exceeded all expectations. The prisoner seemed to have forgotten where he was. The experiment lasted more than 10 hours. The members of the commission went to bed, and the prisoner did not show a hint of fatigue. After this experience, experts agreed on one thing: the perfect stimulant, a substitute for phenamine, had been found. But to whom was it intended? It's hard to believe, but after successful trials, the drug was put into mass use. Now anyone could make a miracle drug at home if they wanted to. Information about him was publicly available. Moreover, drugs were actively advertised. Thus, in the Journal of General Chemistry, which anyone could buy, it is described in detail how to synthesize phenemin and pervitin from improvised drugs.
Here is the recipe. Everything is clearly described here. Pour glacial acetic acid into a round-bottomed flask. Then you need to add a little red phosphorus there. This is how the process of drug synthesis begins. The ingredients for pervitin could be obtained at any pharmacy. For those who could not master a simple recipe, pharmacies offered a ready-made drug.
1951 Moscow. In this pharmacy, pervitin is actively recommended as a means of boosting immunity. And it is sold out very quickly. Almost every visitor takes a pack, regardless of what medicine they came for. Pervitin is recommended by doctors and pharmacists themselves, and gullible people willingly buy it.
Phenemin, pervitin, as well as intoxicating tincture for stomach colic. The pharmacy of those days was a real drug addict's dream. And what is most interesting, all these drugs could be bought without a prescription and quite inexpensively. Until 1968, when these drugs were classified as narcotic and prohibited for widespread use.
In the meantime, these drugs have an important mission: to create a new model of the Soviet superworker, a person who can work even harder, even faster for the benefit of the motherland and the Soviet leaders. And the management plan worked. Production at the factories and plants was restored in record time. However, it was not without losses. Devopedisi, Saratov. Local hospitals are full of people, brought in en masse directly from their workplaces. Doctors worked without rest, but were unable to make a diagnosis. There had never been such a case in Soviet medicine. Something incredible happened to the patients. They had fever, febrile delirium, loss of consciousness. The situation became more and more serious, and the hospital management reported a strange epidemic to Moscow. But the reaction was unpredictable. An order comes from the Kremlin to Saratov to assume that all this was caused by ordinary overwork. But was it really so? What happened to these people?
Only at the beginning of the 90s did scientists manage to shed light on that mysterious event. It turns out that the strange epidemic was the result of long-term use of pervitin. Nervous breakdown, aggression, sudden increase in temperature, paranoia. And this is far from a complete list of side effects.
Because this kind of drug has a downside. This is our physical fatigue. You start to get tired very quickly, I emphasize, very quickly. And those activities, which used to be enough for rest, are not enough for you. Roughly speaking, you've eaten well, you seem to feel good, you're not injured, so you're a perfectly healthy person. But instead of 6 or 7 hours of hard work, you can only do, say, 2 hours, or even an hour. This is the payback for drug use.
The Soviet leadership carefully hushed up this fact, but measures were taken, and conditions at work did not improve. People's salaries did not increase either. Store shelves were still short of the most necessary products, but people no longer rioted, demanding the attention of the authorities. Maybe because they were afraid of arrests, or maybe because they no longer saw the need for it, because they felt quite satisfied with their standard of living. And as it turned out, with good reason. 1955 year. A long queue formed in the bread shop on the outskirts of the city from the very morning. People were anxious, jostling, trying to squeeze closer to the counters. They took several loaves of bread at once, and the entire daily supply of bread was sold out in a matter of hours. But what was the reason for such excitement if there was no shortage of bread in the country? It is incredible, but at that time a small amendment was made to the generally accepted Gosts. Some bakeries were advised to add a special drug to the flour.
We managed to find a unique recipe for this bread. So in those days, bread was made like this: dry yeast, wheat flour, rye malt, and 30 grams of hemp flours. Scientists have found that in small doses, this drug promotes the production of endorphin, the hormone of happiness, in the human body. And it was this drug that successfully fed the Soviet population for several months.
It is not known what worked better, the drug in the bread, or the time during which people's lives gradually began to improve. It was in the 1950s that the labor and demographic indicators of the Soviet people increased in the USSR. At the same time, the Soviet country began to confidently dominate world sports. Already after the debut Olympics, our athletes brought home 77 medals. The results were amazing, but few people knew that the key to this success was not always excellent health and good physical training of athletes. (1956 year, Moscow). That day, a group of Soviet gymnasts was returning from European competitions in the team bus. The girls were triumphant, an unprecedented success. They won 5 medals at once. The athlete was greeted as a heroine. However, they achieved victory at a terrible price. This inhuman way was more effective than any doping. In order to achieve the best sports results, female athletes were forced to get pregnant and have an abortion before the competition.
According to the theory of the people who proposed this manipulation, during an abortion, a hormonal restructuring of the female body takes place. More male sex hormones appear in a woman's body, which in this case is the key to further sports achievements.
It was the strongest natural drug, better than any synthetic drugs and doping. It is 3 times more effective because it was produced by the human body. However, this method could be used infrequently, and certainly not for everyone. But Soviet women were impressive not only in the sports arena. 1960 year, Ryazan, 5 o'clock in the morning. Tractor driver Maria Stepanova carries sacks of grain on her shoulders. One bag of grain weighs 20 kilograms, and she does not seem to feel tired. Today she has to work 2 shifts. Surprisingly, it has been working in this mode for a week. Maria will receive a medal as the best employee. During the ceremony, she will be asked to share a secret, and Maria will tell him. Healthy sleep, work, and means to increase immunity.
It would seem that there is nothing wrong with this, except for this supposedly harmless immune system booster, methylendrostanol. This drug appeared in the USSR as a doping agent for athletes. But the drug was produced in such quantities that not only professional athletes began to use it. Moreover, in those days, it was actively prescribed to women as a common medicine to raise their overall tone.
This was the secret of a real Soviet woman. She must be physically strong to replace a man at the machine. Must be hardy, able to work tirelessly for two. And methylendrostanol should help her in this, which gradually turned women into real men in the literal sense of the word.
This is a drug that affects the metabolism. It is similar to male sex hormones, so it helps to build muscle mass. What happens to a woman who takes male hormones? Can you imagine her hair grows in places that are not typical for a woman? Secondary sexual characteristics disappear, breasts decrease, voice becomes coarser. She will begin to look like a man, while genetically remaining a woman, that is, having two X chromosomes. She will nevertheless begin to masculinize, that is, to resemble a man in appearance.
Apparently, Soviet scientists knew about these side effects. Methylendrostanol was quietly and unnoticed withdrawn from pharmacies. But the crazy drug experiments did not end there. In the 60s, the USSR discovered a new powerful drug, LSD. April 1962, Chita. That morning, the clinic was full of excitement. A new drug was delivered from Switzerland that interested the hospital's chief psychiatrist. So today he decided to test this new product personally. Late at night, when everyone had left, he shut himself in his study and took LSD. And after a few minutes, he fully felt its effect. It was this man who was the first in the USSR to start experiments with LSD. His name was Grigory Stolyarov. Here is how he describes his impressions of taking the drug. After an hour, I had a slight tremor in my hands and an irresistible desire to laugh, although I did not feel any joyful feeling. It became more difficult to record. The hand seems to speed up the movement by itself. You have to forcefully hold your own hand. Within 30 minutes, my condition changed. I felt an indefinite sensation, chills, nausea, and general weakness. Kiev professor Maria Teleshivska also became interested in the new drug. She became its most active researcher and believed that it should be used. But she saw LSD as a cure for alcoholism. In 1964, her doctoral dissertation on narcopsychotherapy was officially published by the Soviet publishing house Medicine. However, as a result of research, cases of psychosis and suicidal moods were recorded. Therefore, experiments with LSD had to be stopped.
LSD was used to a limited extent for one reason. It is very difficult to predict its effect. You think that you are giving LSD to a patient to solve a small therapeutic problem. But this can cause a prolonged psychosis in a person, and it is already necessary to treat the patient for schizophrenia. Although it will be a man-made psychosis and created by you yourself.
During the Khrushchev thaw, experiments with drugs ceased to be so massive, but were still carried out. Many drugs were under development, and for new psychotropic drugs, new experimental rabbits were needed. Here are these, silent and submissive. They were found they were Soviet dissidents.
At that time, the number of detainees in Lubyanka was significantly reduced. Now those who disagreed with the authorities were sent to psychiatric hospitals, where they became ideal working material for new experiments. (1971) Kazan, a prison psychiatric hospital. The dissidents did not want to cooperate with the investigation and testify. They didn't even understand what they were guilty of, but they realized one thing: to admit their guilt, to sign confessions to non-existent crimes, would mean staying here forever. They did not know only one thing: how the necessary information would be obtained from them. The doctors of the clinic crowded around the man tied to the chair. The patient was injected with something. A few minutes later, the man, who had been stubbornly silent for a month, felt very dizzy and then started to speak. This was one of many experiments with the so-called truth serum. These experiments were called interviews with Amytal.
In a 1973 manual on psychiatry for dissidents, Soviet dissidents Bukovsky and Gluzman wrote about pharmacological interrogation, or interviews with Amytal. Intravenous administration of Amytal causes a state quite similar to alcohol intoxication. There is a very simple principle at work. A drunkard's tongue gets loose, he starts talking and cannot stop. After all, he tells everything that they wanted to hear from him.
However, this was not the most dangerous experiment that Soviet doctors conducted on patients. There were even scarier ones. For example, an experiment with the drug haloperidol. It is used in psychiatry as a remedy for nervous disorders.
When it comes to a seriously ill patient with severe psychosis, these disorders can be put up with, because this person is dangerous to himself and others. But if we assume that the same drug is administered to a person who has disapproved of the political regime, then she will not have a therapeutic effect from this drug, because she did not have psychosis, right? A person does not have delusions or hallucinations, but he will have side effects: lethargy, muscle stiffness, lack of adequate facial expressions, sluggish mental processes.
With the help of this drug, Soviet doctors wanted to study the limits of the human body, to investigate what the body is capable of during the excessive use of haloperidol. It is not known how long these experiments lasted in the hospital, but the Russian writer Natalia Gorbanevska, who tested the effect of the drug on herself, told about it for the first time. In 1975, she left the hospital and emigrated abroad. And only there she dared to tell about what actually happened in Soviet mental hospitals. A huge scandal erupted in the world, and the trials with haloperidol had to be stopped. However, not because of public outrage, but the absence of tangible results.
Why do we study human experiments conducted in Nazi Germany, Japan, and other such places? It's because these were the countries that were defeated. The fate of psychoactive substances in the Soviet Union remains unclear. Not only does Russia's FSB continue to guard secrets, but so does Ukraine's SBU, both preserving the mysteries of a country that no longer exists.
According to the official account, covert research and experiments involving narcotic substances ceased by the end of the 70s. However, the materials from secret Kremlin's Special Chemical Laboratory, number 13, remain classified even after 2 decades since the dissolution of the USSR. Following the dissolution of the nation, the archives of Lubyanka were transferred to the FSB, along with the secret recipes of the most remarkable Soviet achievements.
You have bipolar disorder.
Are you out of your mind?
You urgently need treatment for heart disease. But how? Administer enemas 3 times a day. But I have bowel cancer. It's all because of appendicitis.
What should I do now?
Syphilis requires immediate treatment, advanced stage.
Paranoia, epilepsy, syphilis, and atherosclerosis. The health issues of the Kremlin's elite were the biggest secret of the Soviet era. Simultaneously, these diseases turned into lethal weapons in political maneuvers. They battled for power ruthlessly and deliberately. And the main advantage in this struggle was not power or influence. The main advantage was the best and most potent medicine in the Kremlin's arsenal.
For the first time, the secrets of Kremlin's medicine, the mythical syphilis of Lenin. This allowed Joseph Stalin to rise to power. Medications were utilized by doctors to extend Ilyich's life.
At a certain point, Lenin was completely powerless to oppose any of Stalin's decisions.
Mysterious deaths at the Kremlin hospital. Mikhail Frunze, a commander of the Red Army under the command of Joseph Stalin, died on the operating table. This occurred by the directive of the Secretary General.
The addiction specialist quadrupled the dose of ether, and he exceeded the chloroform dosage by 1.5 times. Indeed, this implied that Frunze's tragic demise was absolutely inevitable.
The Kremlin's prison cells were used for political repression. Mikhail Kalinin, the chairman of the Presidium, received enemas for intestinal cancer, and Zhdanov underwent innovative heart treatment. Secrets of the death of Stalin's successor.
He suffered a heart attack, but the Kremlin doctors failed to diagnose it. He was treated for asthma, and after a second heart attack, he passed away.
It was a time of significant medical advancements, a period of power and influence. These were also games where an innocent analysis of the Kremlin's elites could result in a death sentence for them. October 1925. Moscow. A man was being wheeled down the hospital corridor on a stretcher. This is Mikhail Frunze, the People's Commissar for Military and Naval Affairs, an influential and commanding army chief. He was one step away from becoming part of the country's top leadership. And now this unfortunate incident. His wife, Sophia, could not find a place to sit due to her excitement. They had just gotten married. Now she was anxiously waiting in the waiting room, biting her lips until they bled. She wanted to make sure he was okay and that he would get better. But Frunze himself was completely calm. It was supposed to be a minor operation. The only thing that upset the People's Commissar was his own carelessness. Why did he drink so much? If he had controlled himself, the ulcer would not have burst. September 1925, Moscow. This toast was not to be missed. The humble Frunze emptied his glass with a tight smile. That's it, the last drink for today. He will not drink anymore. But toasts for the Secretary General's health followed one after another. They were delivered by his faithful friend and comrade in arms, Kliment Voroshilov. Throughout the evening, he ensured that his friend's glass was always filled to the brim.
Frunze didn't notice anything suspicious in his friend's behavior. Indeed, the heightened attention from a battle-bound comrade was not coincidental. In recent years, Voroshilov and Frunze have been practically inseparable. Hunting, fishing, and frequent trips to the countryside were all accompanied by abundant feasts. The routine also included obligatory alcohol consumption, which was strictly prohibited for a patient with a Frunze ulcer.
Voroshilov was well aware of this. Soon after the extravagant banquets, Mikhail Frunze experienced a worsening of his illness, and Voroshilov was not left helpless. 15 minutes later, an ambulance from the Kremlin arrived. Frunze was taken to the surgery room, and Voroshilov vanished. He fulfilled his role in the game. The future outcome of the operation depended on the doctors.
Prepare anesthesia.
Frunze knew that the surgery could have been avoided. He agreed to the surgery only on the condition that the doctors promised to get him back on his feet quickly. This became a decisive factor. The People's Commissar did not want to stay in bed. He did not want to ruin the much-anticipated vacation that he and his wife had planned in this manner. Sofia had long yearned to depart from Kyiv. The doctors assured that after the surgery, Frunze would be able to walk. The doctor was preparing the anesthesia when an agitated assistant burst into the operating room. An urgent call from the Kremlin.
I'm listening. Yes, yes. What? I understood everything.
When the doctor came back, Frunze was still conscious. The 40 grams of air given to the People's Commissar did not have any effect. The doctor tripled the dose. And yet there was still no effect.
It's okay. Give me chloroform. I meant chloroform.
Everyone in the operating room knew that combining these medications, particularly in such doses, is extremely dangerous.
Chloroform has been known since the beginning of the 19th century. This is the most poisonous drug. It causes many different complications. These complications include heart rhythm abnormalities and cardiac arrest. The pharmacologists kindly explained that the use of chloroform is very dangerous, especially if this medication leaks excessively onto the mask. Furthermore, both pharmacologists and surgeons asserted that the combined usage of ether and chloroform led to particularly severe complications.
However, the doctors administered to Frunze a dose of chloroform that was 1.5 times the recommended amount. They had no other choice, because their own lives were at stake. Eventually, Frunze's heart failed during the operation. Attempts to revive cardiac activity were unsuccessful. Frunze passed away at 5:30 in the morning. He was only 40 years old.
A thorough examination of all accessible data revealed it turned out that no operation was needed. The surgeons were only able to open the abdominal cavity, perform an examination of the abdominal organs. These are, so to say, the initial stages, and cross several intersections. After that, as his heart rate appeared to begin decreasing, they had to immediately halt the operation. I had to quickly stitch up the surgical wound. After that, he underwent procedures that were later referred to as resuscitation.
Stalin was victorious. Everything went great. Now no one will be able to suspect that Frunze's death was not accidental.
We can only talk about one thing. Stalin insisted on conducting operations. Even when Dr. Rozanov, the Kremlin's chief surgeon, had serious doubts about its necessity. For some reason, he was very reluctant to undergo the surgery.
It was Stalin who, upon learning about Frunze's illness, ordered Voroshilov to assist his associate. He took on the task with enthusiasm. After Frunze's death, he pledged to appoint Voroshilov as the army commander. Stalin's first priority was to remove Frunze. The People's Commissar was too influential, too young, and too popular among the people. He was adored by the military and the Politburo. And it was he, not Stalin, who was referred to as the successor of the late Lenin. If Frunze had wanted to, he could have easily ousted the leader from the position of general secretary, but Stalin wouldn't allow that. Frunze could not be arrested or executed. The assassination of the commander-in-chief would have incited popular anger and indignation among influential party members. He needed a reliable, tested weapon. A weapon created by his predecessor, Vladimir Lenin. 1923, Gorky. He leaned against the bathroom door with his entire body and held his breath. Only here did Lenin feel secure. He knew that there was turmoil in the mountainous country. They are looking for him. But no, there's no way he's getting out of here. They persistently knocked on the door, but Lenin resisted with all his might. He could not tolerate this abuse any longer. He was forcibly administered the most potent chemicals for a long time. He was forcibly injected with arsenic. He was compelled to take mercury pills to treat alleged syphilis. Lenin attempted to resist, but they continued to treat him until he passed away.
The prisoner of the Kremlin, that's how Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was referred to in the Western press. Indeed, the conditions of his life at his country house in the mountains were akin to a prison. He was prohibited from receiving visitors, reading newspapers, and using the telephone. All that Lenin was permitted to do was to take numerous medications, which were consistently and punctually delivered to him by doctors.
Ilyich didn't give up until the very end. Because, like no one else, he knew that such attention was not due to concern for his health.
At a certain point, Lenin found himself utterly incapable of opposing any of Stalin's decisions. Even though he penned this renowned letter to Congress, attempting to convey a different message, his powerless condition was such that he couldn't truly impact anything.
Dear Felix, I believe that everything that has happened to me is the work of Stalin and all those who are allied with him. I was actually isolated from the party and society. I believe I might be poisoned or harmed. What should I do? This letter was only declassified in 2009. Lenin covertly handed it over to the country's first Chekist, Felix Dzerzhinsky, through one of his secretaries. However, the letter was never made public. He reached Joseph Stalin, and Lenin's fate was sealed. A month later, the leader of the revolution passed away. The hospital in the Kremlin, established by Lenin, fell under Stalin's control. Under his guidance, it became a division of Lubyanka. It was the 1930s. Stalin had just started to consolidate his power. The leader was well aware that there were many more enemies around him. He has to deal with all of them. Sufficient incriminating evidence was found on Ilyich Zinoviev's former associates, including Kamenev, to execute them as part of the political repressions of that era. Serhiy Kirov, the leader of the Leningrad Regional Party Committee, who opposed Stalin's nomination, was impersonated. According to the official version, he was killed by a terrorist's gunshot. Indeed, Kirov's assassination was orchestrated in the Kremlin. Others were more challenging. His arch-nemesis Leon Trotsky was in hiding overseas. Others were around, but they were not so easy to interact with. During his 8-year tenure, the head of the OGPU, Vyacheslav Menzhinsky, mastered the art of not leaving traces of crime. If they had been, Menzhinsky would have been able to reveal much more about his collaboration with Stalin during the interrogation. The situation was similar with Mikhailo Kalinin. The former associate of Lenin and chairman of the Presidium had crucial information to reveal to the investigation. These people should have been handled more carefully. And Stalin had a revelation. Doctors. Once upon a time, they assisted in the matters concerning Frunze and Lenin. It was a perfect subtle move. Eliminate them one by one, subtly and quietly, so that their demise does not raise suspicion. There was no better remedy. May 10, 1934, the Kremlin, 10:15 in the morning. A tense silence prevailed in the Politburo hall. 15 minutes ago, an important meeting convened by Stalin was supposed to start. Party members have been grappling in the field for an extended period. There was also a leader here. He looked indignantly at the empty chair. After the general secretary, the head of the OGPU, Vyacheslav Menzhinsky, was scheduled to deliver a welcome speech at the meeting, but he was not in the hall.
Is it all right, comrades, if we wait a little longer?
His words, his movements, nothing revealed his inner turmoil. Stalin was prepared to wait as long as required because everything hinged on his patience. May 10, 1934, at Gorky 6, 10:20 in the morning. He was panting, inhaling air through his mouth, wheezing and convulsing. Vyacheslav Menzhinsky could not even reach the phone to call the Kremlin. He knew that he had been expected at the meeting 20 minutes ago. Just yesterday, the head of the OGPU was confident that he would display full strength and energy. However, Menzhinsky's plans were thwarted by a sudden asthma attack. He was frantic, gripping the hand of his close friend and sole assistant, Dr. Kazakov. He was always by his side, treating him for this disease for many years. However, the treatment did not help. Before losing consciousness, Menzhinsky shifted his intense, frantic gaze to the clock. It was 10:30. May 10, 1934, the Kremlin, 10:30 in the morning. Stalin turned his attention to the members of the Politburo. He saw his fellow party members whispering in fear. Of course, the Kremlin was aware of Menzhinsky's poor health. The OGPU head had long been plagued by health problems, including kidney issues and asthma. Due to his prolonged and chronic illness, Menzhinsky was constantly under medical supervision. However, he was an extremely responsible individual and never missed a Politburo meeting. Never until now. Half an hour passed, and Menzhinsky did not show up. Finally, a scared secretary appeared in the room.
Comrades! Information has just been received. Comrade Menzhinsky has passed away.
The news about the death of Vyacheslav Menzhinsky deeply moved those present. No one noticed the relief that flashed across the leader's face for a split second. Stalin was satisfied. The plan worked flawlessly.
Indeed, the OGPU during the 30s was akin to a state, implying it had the power to control everything and everyone. Therefore, if such a structure is managed by the wrong person, then of course it would likely be disadvantageous, primarily to Stalin. It's hard to determine whether Menzhinsky was entirely a Trotskyist. However, it is undeniable that he was not entirely subordinate to Stalin.
From the moment the leader first suspected Menzhinsky of treason, he began to closely monitor his subordinates' activities. It was not difficult. Dr. Kazakov regularly updated the leader on the progress of the treatment. For several months, the doctor had been incorporating a foxglove plant extract into Menzhinsky's concoction. This poison killed slowly and imperceptibly, much like the asthma that had afflicted the head of the OGPU for many years.
If a person has pneumonia, the treatment procedure should be carried out in such a way as to alleviate this pneumonia. Consequently, there was no suspicion that anything was wrong. It was simply a single complication. As we start treating one complication, another arises. When we address that, a third one occurs, and eventually, it results in death.
With his hand on his heart, Stalin stepped out into the corridor. He felt unwell. The blood was pulsating rapidly in his temples. However, the cause of this was not the death of the country's chief Chekist, but Stalin's own ailing heart. Joseph Vissarionovich was starting to lose his footing. Yes, the Secretary General was fully aware of his subordinates' health conditions, but the leader carefully concealed his own illnesses. 1927, the Kremlin.
You are paranoid.
The Secretary General's face remained impassive. He looked into the eyes of academician Bekhterev. He will now recognize his error and apologize for the incorrect and irrational diagnosis. Perhaps he will be forgiven. But Bekhterev remained silent. Famous psychiatrist, professor. Of course, he could not be wrong. But this righteousness cost him his life. Bekhterev will pass away this evening. Stalin would never visit the doctor again, despite the numerous illnesses that plagued him throughout his life.
Contrary to the common stereotype of the leader's robust health, Stalin suffered from numerous illnesses. As a child, he contracted smallpox and severely injured his hand. Therefore, he was unable to lift anything heavier than a smoking pipe with his left hand. Later, while in exile, the leader suffered from joint rheumatism. This issue was exacerbated by severe outbreaks of influenza and sore throat. He suffered from stomach disorders. He suffered from headaches, psoriasis, and high blood pressure.
There were always doctors nearby who could help. However, Stalin did not wish to address them. He was all too familiar with the intricacies of medical games, which he himself had initiated. And now he was most afraid that he himself would become a pawn in this game.
Stalin was scared of doctors. He was scared and distrustful. There were rumors in the Kremlin that Stalin did not like to be treated. In essence, Stalin attempted to disregard any minor ailments such as sneezing or colds, to evade medical treatment. Essentially, he avoided doctors' appointments. However, he probably believed that when he orchestrated the murders through doctors, there were people capable of directing doctors towards him.
He knew how to take care of himself. Breathing is steady, pulse is slightly elevated. Slowly and methodically, checking his watch occasionally, he dug into the ground in the Kremlin yard. The leader performed such physical exercises every morning. Stalin never skipped this exercise, as it was his way of maintaining good health. Stalin chose the same plot of land every day. Knowing this, the guards patrolled the leader's favorite area in the evening, so that the ground is firm enough to dig the next day. Exercise was only a part of the leader's health program. When assistance was not provided, heavy artillery was used. Folk recipes clipped by the leader from magazines and newspapers.
Thanks to them, Stalin learned that juice from parsley and raw potatoes should be consumed for high blood pressure. Psoriasis should be treated with an ointment made of celandine and petroleum jelly. The leader frequently treated sore throats with lemons. He ate them with the skin on. However, none of the recipes spared the leader from heartache, which became increasingly frequent.
And now he felt a familiar pain in his chest. Stalin had a hard time leaving the meeting room. All the better. The news of Menzhinsky's death would distract the members of the Politburo. This means that no one will notice if the leader's performance suddenly declines. My legs and arms felt like jelly and did not respond. His heart felt like it was going to jump out of his chest.
Comrade Stalin, should I call for a doctor?
Are you out of your mind? Go away. Go away.
Stalin could not allow others to find out about his illness. Although it was these diseases that led to the leader's subsequent medical issues. He ousted Lenin and Frunze to establish himself in power. Now the leader was afraid that no one would be able to usurp this power. As a result of his increasing paranoia, he saw enemies everywhere. The adversaries were once allies and members of the Politburo. One of them, Vyacheslav Menzhinsky, can finally be removed from the list. The next issue was as follows. A case that has troubled him for years and has long become personal. At second place on the list is Leon Trotsky. 1938, Paris. Lev Sedov did not feel tired. He wanted to finish his father's manuscript as soon as possible. For several months, he and Trotsky collaborated on an authentic biography of Stalin.
The book was expected to be a sensation. Secrets of Stalin's crimes, the assassination of Lenin and Zinoviev, and the final testament of the leader. Leon Trotsky was about to disclose this information for the first time, the only thing that slowed down the work. Due to the persecution by the Chekists, Trotsky was compelled to continually change his place of residence, conceal himself, and flee. Hence, his son occasionally had to wait several months for priceless manuscripts handed over by custodians.
And now he has finally received the final chapter. This means that the publishing house will release the printed version of the book in a few weeks. And then the entire world will discover the truth about Joseph Stalin's actions. The individual who made Leon Trotsky's life miserable and who was closely monitoring his son at that moment. 1938, the Kremlin. Stalin yelled and struggled in a rage. Addressing Lavrenti Beria, he did not mince his words. For many years, the country's top intelligence agents were unable to identify and neutralize Lev Trotsky. If his book gets published, Beria will take personal responsibility. The chief of the NKVD didn't even flinch. He was prepared for this meeting and was able to withstand the pressure from the leader. 1938, Paris. The young man was taken to a small clinic in the city center. He urgently needed to have his appendix removed. Lev Sedov was furious. Why did the attack occur now, just when the book was nearly finished? Sedov was in a rush, yet the doctors assured him that the operation was minor, but it could not be delayed.
The operation was successful. Parisian doctors successfully treated appendicitis without any complications. But on the fourth day following the surgery, the patient's health suddenly worsened. Later, it was revealed that during the surgery, doctors administered an ampule of potassium cyanide to Sedov. A few days later, the ampule broke, and Sedov died. He was only 32 years old.
The brilliant plan of the Soviet leader worked. Before ordering the execution of Trotsky, he will command the elimination of all his children. Lev Sedov was discreetly and imperceptibly eliminated. The book was never published. And Stalin, satisfied with the outcome of Trotsky's case, moved on to the next name on the death row list. 1945, the Kremlin. On this day, the Politburo meeting sparked heated discussions. The case of generals found guilty of power abuse was reviewed. However, Stalin did not heed this. He carefully observed the speaker, the lively and enthusiastic chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, Mikhail Kalinin.
The gentle and submissive head of the Presidium was a dutiful puppet of Stalin for many years. He signed all the directives of the Politburo. In this way, he actually took responsibility for what he had done. But lately, he has started behaving inappropriately. He argued and refused to sign some documents. Under Stalin, no one could afford this.
The general secretary has already punished him once. He sent Kalinin's wife to Siberian camps for several years. But it seems that the lesson was never learned. Stalin understood that he could no longer procrastinate and wait. Kalinin was highly esteemed in the Politburo. He was recognized on the streets. This popularity and lack of control could prove too costly for Stalin. 1946, Kremlin Hospital.
Administer enemas 3 times a day. I have colon cancer.
Mikhail Kalinin cried like a child. For over a year, he took enemas and pills for gastritis as prescribed by his doctor. But it didn't help. Terrible pain tormented him more and more frequently. And only now the doctors were able to give him an accurate diagnosis. Intestinal cancer. Where did this terrible disease originate? Recently, he was assured at the same hospital that he is completely healthy.
Kalinin was unaware that he had signed his own death warrant a year earlier when he had the audacity to contradict Stalin. In his case, the leader resorted to the tried and tested method, albeit with a minor modification. This time, the Kremlin doctors did not fabricate imaginary diseases. They simply didn't inform the patient about the actual illness.
In 1929, doctors performed the same procedure on Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya. At the age of 69, she became active, participating in rallies and openly criticizing Stalin's policies. However, this proved to be dangerous, and she paid a heavy price for it.
Indeed, Krupska was treated by the same Kremlin doctors in 1939, 2 days before her 70th birthday. She arranged a reunion with old friends, former Bolsheviks. She prepared a large number of dumplings for the entire group of guests, about 30 people. And after that party, she felt sick. Her stomach started to hurt. Doctors at the Kremlin initially diagnosed her with food poisoning. They treated her for food poisoning, but she eventually developed appendicitis.
Doctors did the same to Mikhailo Kalinin. A year ago, when he was first admitted to the hospital, he could still have been saved. But now there was no hope. The cancer metastasized to the liver and lungs. It was too late.
He served the representative role, so to speak. He completely concealed Stalin's activities. Stalin gave orders, issued directives, and Kalinin implemented all of it through the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet. They enacted collectivization laws. Laws regarding the theft of socialist property and related matters. Stalin merely utilized it. When it became of no use to Stalin, he simply discarded it.
After Kalinin's death, Stalin abolished the position of the chairman of the council. He won't make the same mistake again. He will not entrust this position to anyone. Ever since then, he viewed even the slightest mistake made by the members of the Politburo as an act of treason. With Kalinin's death, the list of those condemned to death will be filled with new names. However, seeing conspiracies everywhere, Stalin would perceive a masterful game. In this game, he will be a brilliant but helpless pawn. August 1948. Government summer house in Valdai. Andrei Zhdanov, a member of the Politburo and secretary of the Central Committee, was lying on the floor of his office. He writhed in excruciating pain. He was well aware of his illness and therefore brought a team of doctors with him, even on a short vacation. He had been calling them for several minutes. Zhdanov's condition was deteriorating, but there were no doctors available. Zhdanov was unaware that waiting for help this time would be futile. And his closest friend and ally, Joseph Stalin, is to blame for this. February 1948, the Kremlin. This evening, the leader had more fun than ever. He presented the birthday boy with a large bouquet of flowers and even permitted himself to overindulge in drinking. Zhdanov was happy. Not everyone merits such attention from the manager. Stalin flushed from wine. He rose to make a toast. Everyone at the table fell silent.
Let's drink tonight. To the health of my friend, my successor.
Andrei Zhdanov.
Zhdanov froze. No one uttered a word. For the first time, Stalin openly named the next general secretary. And he did it in the presence of the country's foremost figures, Khrushchev and Malenkov. No one expected this from the leader. Everyone toasted to Comrade Zhdanov's health.
But from that moment forward, as if by a cruel fate, Zhdanov became tragically plagued with health issues.
He lay on the cold floor for more than an hour, screaming and throwing a tantrum. He was unaware that all this time a team of doctors was eavesdropping outside the door. When he stopped breathing, the phone in the Kremlin rang. August 1948, the Kremlin.
How is Comrade Zhdanov's health? He died.
Lavrenti Beria hung up the phone and looked meaningfully at Khrushchev and Malenkov. That's it. The job is done. They managed to peacefully remove Stalin's future successor to the position of General Secretary and their main rival for power. This was achieved through the leader's potent instrument, the Kremlin's tactic.
Malenkov, Beria, and Khrushchev carefully examined Zhdanov's case for a long time and soon discovered a vulnerability. It turns out that the member of the Politburo had a heart condition. Then it was a matter of minor details. It was crucial to determine when Zhdanov would take his vacation, accompanied by his doctors. The plan was to induce a heart attack and then simply wait.
As it turned out, all this time doctors had been treating Zhdanov's heart condition with asthma medication. The truth was only revealed after his death.
The truth is, he suffered a heart attack, but the Kremlin doctors failed to diagnose the heart attack, instead treating him for asthma. After suffering another heart attack, he passed away. Then one of the doctors who conducted the electrocardiogram, Lydia Timoshchuk, wrote a report stating that Zhdanov had suffered a heart attack. Other doctors didn't heed her, and following Zhdanov's demise, they endeavored to discredit her assertions and diagnosis to vindicate their treatment approaches.
1948, the Kremlin. Stalin could not find a place for himself. For the first time in years, he was scared to death. But how could this happen? The leader did not issue orders for this. This only meant one thing: he was betrayed. Joseph Stalin was now in a state of desperate fear for his own life. And for a good reason. A few years will pass, and the leader himself will fall victim to the method of medical treatment he invented. He will pass away at his country house. Hemorrhage in the brain, that was the official cause of his death. Stalin spent the last hours of his life surrounded by the people he feared so much, the Kremlin doctors.
His successor in office, Nikita Khrushchev, will carry on the leader's work. However, with him, the Kremlin's political maneuvers are extending beyond domestic boundaries. Eliminated spies and enemies of the state, traitors and informants. Many of the emigrants will become victims of miracle drugs created by Soviet doctors.
In the Kremlin itself, there will be a brief period of medical tranquility. Khrushchev was known for his robust health, and he preferred to address all issues through force, not through intrigue. He was never a subtle player, and he vanquished his enemies with straightforward arrests. The medical games in the Kremlin only resumed with the arrival of Leonid Brezhnev, but the rules of these games were changed forever. Brezhnev relied heavily on sleeping pills, which led to his dependency on them. General Secretary Andropov, due to kidney disease, spent 15 months of his tenure in the hospital, undergoing hemodialysis. After his passing, the Kremlin's VIP quarters were taken over by the asthmatic Chernenko. Now they were just pawns in the grand scheme of things. The main stake of the game was not politics and power, but their very lives.